Hello, everybody, and welcome to Shannon Q. I believe we are live. I am hoping the chat will let me know. I'm looking at the chat right now so that you guys can let me know if you guys can see us. Today, I am looking forward to a very interesting and productive dialogue regarding a topic that is not always spoken about productively. So, today I have Trent Horne with me, who I'm going to give an opportunity to introduce himself in just a moment. But before I do that, I'll just let you all know in case anybody needs to make sure that they are psychologically safe from this discussion. We are going to be having conversations surrounding abortion. So if this is something that you don't feel comfortable listening to, please make sure you take care of yourself first. That's what's most paramount to me. So I was tagged on Twitter an infinite amount of times because Trent was looking for a conversation partner where he could have a productive dialogue. I believe it was particularly with like a female and or an atheist or potentially both that would be a good dialogue partner. And I got, flatteringly enough, I got tagged in that quite a bit, even though this isn't a topic that I discuss very, very frequently. So we connected with one another and set a time, and here we are. So Trent, before we get going onto the topic, please just let my audience know who you are and where they can find you.
Sure. So my name is Trent Horne. I am an apologist and speaker for Catholic Answers, which is a media apostolate dedicated to explaining and defending the Catholic faith. My personal mission is to engage in productive dialogue with people who are not Catholic or Catholics who question the Catholic faith, and for us to reason together to get closer to the truth. I've written about 9 books on various topics like atheism, the Bible, Protestantism, moral issues. I have a podcast called The Council of Trent, Counsel. If you have any Catholics in your audience, hopefully they'll catch the pun there. And that's at trenthornepodcast.com. It's at Google, iTunes. And I just started a channel on YouTube like a few weeks ago. It's a baby channel on its way, Council of Trent, on there where I'm posting more dialogues and short videos. But my goal is to really, I believe in the Catholic faith. I believe it's a true, good, and beautiful thing, but I know not everyone believes that or agrees with it. And I think that what we all can agree on, though, is the importance of having civil dialogue amongst one another who disagree and try to find ways to get more resolution on these important issues that divide us.
Wonderful. That all sounds like you and I will get along just great then.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so I've been looking forward to it. It's been a little while in the making because both of us have pretty ridiculous schedules. So I appreciate you making the time, and I thank you very much. And I believe that this is going to, or at least portions of it are going to be posted on your podcast at a later date. So if anybody's interested in checking it out, please go and do so. I'm going to ask Trent for his links so that I can put them in the description down below after this dialogue. So that
I think that would be great, and I'm very grateful that you agreed to speak with me. What's funny is, like, when I go on the internet, I find a lot of people, whether they're Christians or atheists, who have no problem like posting videos like criticizing other people, but it's actually kind of rare to find people who are willing to sit down and do dialogues like this. I've seen a lot of people, both Christian and atheist, they're willing to just kind of put out their view, but not sit across the table. And so it's refreshing to see someone willing to do that.
Yeah, look, right back at you. I think it's incredibly important because we're so busy, I think, spewing our ideas at each other nowadays that we don't really take time to figure out where another person might be coming from and how they get to where they are, and where, we might have things in common. We do a lot of othering. We other people quite frequently based on, very limited information that we have, and polarize ourselves. And a lot of us have more in common than we have to have in conflict. So I appreciate you doing the same, and I'm glad to hear that that's something that you're open to and enjoy doing. So now let's fight. Let's fight.
Sure thing.
Seriously though.
It's funny. It's this issue.
It's contentious. It's an emotional issue.
Abortion is a very emotional issue, and I think the reason that it's such an emotional issue is because the stakes are incredibly high, and only one side can be right, or at least have the majority of the truth on its side. And whichever side is correct, the consequences are very dire, because it's not like I mean, you don't see people get this emotional about like the flat tax or like, something else where people have a gradient of views. Like for me, I feel like if I'm wrong about this, about the issue of abortion, like I believe abortion ought to be illegal. I think the unborn are human beings and abortion is an act of violence against them. But if I'm wrong about that, then I would be causing a severe amount of harm to women, to those who obtain abortion, and I would be really setting the clock back and reducing their personhood almost if I'm wrong. But I feel like though if I'm right, and if the other side's wrong, then a large amount of violence is being legally sanctioned every day. So I think it's contentious because the stakes are very high and like both sides can't be right,
And ultimately, I think what it comes down to and why it is so existentially important to people is because the real argument is, what does it mean to be a person? And when do we become a person? And that's something that matters to all of us because we matter to ourselves and we want to matter to others. So the ultimate question is, when do we start to matter and why? Like, what makes us matter? So that makes it a very emotional issue for people. Now, I'm guessing, and this is just a complete guess, that I potentially see a later emergence of what would constitute personhood than you likely would, since you seemed, any abortion, presumably, you would think should be illegal and is violence, is killing a person. So that would mean that immediately upon fertilization, that constitutes a person, like that blastocyst to zygote stage of embryonic development, that like right at that point, that constitutes a person. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, and I'd be interested to see your take on this question and how it's framed. I believe that a person is an individual member of a rational kind. So personhood does not reflect, personhood is a value judgment about certain kinds of beings that have particular kinds of rights and intrinsic value. Okay. And so I think that personhood does not reflect one's abilities. It reflects one's identity. Personhood just is about, it's a property that it's categorical, you have it or you don't. I don't believe it comes in degrees. I think all people are equally valuable, are equally precious, and have an equal right to life. And so you're correct. It's very important to figure out who a person is.
Sure.
Because my view is not just that all human beings matter, because it's possible there are persons that are not humans. I mean, as a Catholic, I believe angels exist and they're persons, but they're not human. It could be possible in our universe, there could be extraterrestrial life that is rational, that is a person, but it's not a human. And I'd figure out, well, are they people? Like, to give you an example, like I think if Yoda from Empire Strikes Back was here, a person would be a person. He is. But I also think that that's true for Baby Yoda. He's not technically Baby Yoda, but now called that in The Mandalorian. That's on Disney Plus.
I finished all of it. Oh, it's done. Oh, yeah, I finished it. I don't know if you know this, but my boyfriend used to work for Lucasfilm. So.
Oh, wow.
And I'm Team Trek. So
okay.
It's rough in our household.
You mean Star Trek?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I never enjoyed the comparison between Star Trek and Star Wars, because the only thing they really have in common is star. Yeah. One is an anthology series that thoughtfully takes philosophy and puts it in space fictional stories, and the other is a swashbuckling Flash Gordon space opera. But that's a different debate.
That is a very different debate. Maybe we'll have that next. But
apples and oranges. So my point there is that even Baby Yoda from The Mandalorian may not have the rational abilities that adult Yoda has from Empire Strikes Back, but they're the same kind of being that, to me, I would say is a rational kind or a person. So that my position would be that all persons are valuable and have a right to life. We ought not directly kill them.
Right.
But and so I'm curious, from your position, is your position that if a human embryo or a human fetus were a person, you would be opposed to abortion?
Yeah, actually, I have a perspective that in order to find out essentially whether or not, because I would agree with most of what you said when it comes to personhood, like on a surface level, if anything, any person who is cognizant of their own existence and is capable and aware of their existence should be considered a person. Any sort of sentient life, I guess, would be a really broad way to do this. But the question is, what constitutes a person? Being able to correctly and accurately qualify and quantify what constitutes personhood is an important thing to do. And I would attach that to cognition, and specifically to thalamic development. It's a structure in the brain that a lot of studies the thalamus have shown is sort of related to consciousness and to our emergence of self-awareness and what we would consider to be consciousness. And in early stages of embryonic fetal development, that's not really there, not in any way that we would have an aptitude for self-awareness or even anything higher than sort of basal reflective responses to external stimuli. And if what's constituting a person is being able to have basal reflexive responses to external or environmental stimuli, then we have to expand personhood in incredibly broad swaths to anything that's alive, really, at that point in time. I mean, there's a little bit more nuance to my argument later, but to get back to yours, what do you think constitutes a person?
Sure. I believe that for me, when we think about persons, it has something to do with their rational nature. I think you and I seem to both agree with that. Okay. Because it seems to me, do you believe that there are not any non-human animals are persons in the same sense that humans are persons?
I think you could make a pretty strong argument for most primate groups, most higher order primate groups. Dolphins, you could probably make a pretty strong argument towards too. And I think it's because they display social interaction, sort of proto-linguistic abilities, elephants potentially as well, because they demonstrate empathy. But one of the things that they all have in common with us is larger cranial cavities and prefrontal lobes and higher thalamic development that would lead towards that cognitively from a neuroscience perspective.
I think if dolphins are persons, they should be in prison. They're the worst.
Oh, they're bad. But just because you're self-aware doesn't mean that you're adhering to the same moral structures that we like. Yeah. That's us anthropomorphizing our moral structures onto the animal kingdom, right?
You'd only pick higher order animals. It sounds like you wouldn't give that to, let's say, like animals that are aware of stimuli and even have rudimentary planning skills, like a rat or a snake or a pigeon.
Potentially. That's a broader argument. Like, I feel like now we're entering into an argument for whether or not veganism is a good way to go, right? Because if you're utilizing that metric to describe what personhood is, then potentially the morally right thing to do, if cognitive development and moral interaction and the ability to rationally assess the environment around you is what constitutes personhood, then we probably shouldn't be eating animals because they can demonstrate those abilities. So what makes us special?
Well, it sounds, I mean, the argument would be you shouldn't eat people.
No.
I premise you and I would agree with.
Don't eat people.
But then if animals are people, you shouldn't eat them.
Right.
But I don't think most people would agree with that argument. I think even many vegans, I don't know if they would say that the death of, let's say, like a rat is morally equivalent with like the death of a newborn infant or a toddler, or I don't know if many would be willing to go that far to say that if you fumigate a barn to kill a family of rats, I think most people would say that is not morally equivalent to fumigating a house to get rid of a family of squatters,
right?
The key here is, for me, if we ground, it sounds like first we have some common ground, because there is a lot of people who will say abortion is still fine even if the fetus is a person. But it sounds like we have some common ground. We both agree we shouldn't kill innocent people. And so if a fetus or a human embryo was an innocent person, abortion would be seriously wrong. Now we have to figure out what a person is.
Yes.
And so I think we also both agree that personhood has something to do with our cognitive abilities and our rational, and I would say it's rational abilities that exceed that of other animals. Because I could think of three kinds of living creatures. A living creature that is not sentient, like a plant. Sure. A living creature that is sentient, but not a person. So a creature that is aware of pain, is aware of lightness and dark and heat and cold, but is not a person, does not have that level of consciousness. And then of animals that are persons. I think, properly speaking, that only applies to humans as we know it. But you're willing to broaden it. But I got to figure out where we draw that line between sentient and has, but not a person, versus sentient and is a person. Because I think sentience and consciousness are two different things.
Well, I think we're a little bit, yes. Well, no, actually, I think that they're kind of synonymous, but discussed differently. But I think that we're looking farther down the line. So we're both agreeing that when somebody's sentient, self-aware, rational, and is capable of reason and a self-identification, and response stimuli, like all of those things, it would be morally incorrect to end their life or harm them on purpose. Now, there's more nuance when it comes to abortion, and like I said, I will get into that later. But first, I think one of the important things to establish is we've both kind of agreed that sentience and that establishment of personhood is tied to the ability to have cognition. The ability to have cognition is directly tied to the development of your neocortex, and your neocortex doesn't develop until later stages in a pregnancy. So I guess my point would be that even if we both agree on what constitutes a person doesn't apply to a blastocyst, to an early stage embryo. Like most stages of pregnancy before 20 weeks, there's not a lot of neurological firing aside from reflexive responses. Only your cerebellum really is developed, your prefrontal cortex. Most of the other components of your cortices aren't actually developed yet for you to even have the ability for that sort of awareness. So why, without what we agreed upon, cognition, why precognition would abortion be wrong?
Because I would say that what makes a being valuable and what makes killing wrong, and there's multiple ways that you could sort out why killing a person is wrong. I would say that persons are valuable in and of themselves. And so their value doesn't come from their present ability to exercise a certain capacity, but just from the fact that they exist and they're the kind of being who has that capacity. So I think that there is, I'll explain my position, and then I have a question for you to fold this through.
Sure.
There is a difference between having an immediate capacity and a capacity to have a capacity. For example, you and I have the capacity to speak English that's presently exhibited.
Moderately well.
Yeah. And we both have the capacity to speak Tagalog or Cantonese, for example. And so we have the capacity to do that, even though we're not able to exercise the capacity at this time. It could develop later if we took Rosetta Stone or did things like that. So I would say a person is not someone who has the capacity for consciousness, but is the kind of being that has the capacity to have the capacity for consciousness. That's in virtue of the kind of being they are. And I think that this view, because it's tied to whether you are or aren't, you either are this kind of being or you aren't, I think that it's a very good view for several reasons. One would be this: if having consciousness is what gives us value, like if it gives us our value as beings, and if the property that gives us value comes in degrees, then it would seem to follow that that some people would have more value than other people if the property that gave us value came in degrees, such as consciousness or intelligence. Some people are more aware or less aware than others. But if it's a property that you either have or you don't have, being a member of the human species or not, well, then all members of the human species, regardless of their cognitive abilities, their functional levels, would be treated equally, and they wouldn't necessarily be susceptible to discrimination from things like ableism, for example. They're just, all human beings are equal in virtue of the kind of being they are, not their functional ability. And I guess my question for you would be, at what point in human develop does a human have consciousness that you're talking about to make them a person? But you can respond to what I said, but that's what I'm curious about your view.
Yeah, there was a lot of interesting things that you said there. So your analogy fell apart for me a little bit when it came to capacity for language, because I'm currently demonstrating the ability to utilize a language. Like I'm forming morphemes and phonemes, right? Like I'm producing language. Right. But just because I'm not producing a different language, that doesn't mean that I don't have the capacity for language. Your analogy was utilizing the ability to use one language over another, as opposed to the ability for language at all.
I could do something. I could change the analogy to say that most people, you and I probably have the capacity to reproduce, sure. But that was not true when we were toddlers. We had the capacity to have that capacity. It just had not developed yet. And yet we were still animals. If you define an animal as a creature that can reproduce, especially those who reproduce by sexual reproduction, we fell into that kind, even though we couldn't exercise the capacity at that point in our development. Okay,
so I see what you mean. But the reason I think that your initial analogy kind of tried to work and that one may not, for me personally, is because what we were doing was tying it to personhood, and we can't tie reproductive abilities to personhood, because you can still be a person cognitively without the ability to reproduce, right? Like there's people that are sterile that can't reproduce.
But right, my point was just that I'm just saying that there are certain kinds of attributes we have, or things that we can do, that we can immediately exercise them, but it also is the case we're the kind of being who can develop the ability to exercise those things. And that makes us a kind of being that is different than other kinds of beings. So for example, if you have, if you see a cat that can't read, even though reading is a good thing, that cat is not malformed or having a developmental problem, because cats by their natures don't read. But a 10-year-old who can't read, we would consider them suffering from illiteracy and an improper development. And so if we had a way to treat them, we would treat the 10-year-old human as having a developmental problem, but not the cat, because there's something in virtue of his nature that he ought to be functioning in a certain way. And so I think if we look at the human nature, it's a valuable thing and it ought to function in a certain way. So, but I think I want to get back to what a person is, because I'm just trying to see from your perspective.
I think that's where we're getting caught up, because like all of these things that you're mentioning that like we have capacity for and others don't, I tie those all back to neural function, right?
I agree. The brain is what allows us to do these things.
But it seems as though you're saying before we have any sort of, just the mere potentiation that one day we may have cortices means that even though we don't yet, the potential of the future development of those cortices is, worth seeing through, even though, because we will one day.
Right. Well, my point is that we are the kind of being who would develop in that way, and persons have a right to naturally develop in virtue of what they are. And I think your view, because some people may criticize my view and say, well, you're just saying that value comes in potentialities.
Right.
But are you saying that when the thalamus or the frontal lobe or the neocortex, whichever part of the brain it may be,
a bunch of them all together.
Reaches a point of development, consciousness emerges. What does consciousness mean to you? What is that particular trait or property? What does it entail?
That is such a huge question. That's a massive question. So to me, consciousness, this is going to be incredibly simplistic and drilled down, because that's a question that philosophers and neuroscientists have been attempting to answer since we were aware that it was a question worth answering. So I'm not going to be able to answer it today, realistically, and neither are you. I don't. If you can, please do. But I think
that early embryos and fetuses don't have consciousness.
Yeah, no, because I see it as an emergent property of our neocortical structures. Like without those neurons firing, without those electrical impulses traveling back and forth, without those neurochemicals bouncing around in our brain, we aren't aware. We aren't aware of what's going on around us. We aren't aware of ourselves. We aren't able to react to our environment. I mean, there's you reference levels of consciousness. I don't necessarily think that there really are levels of consciousness. I think that we, as people, like to quantify and classify things and put them into groups because we have these sort of biases where we like to, we like to make schemas and build them around things and classify people and classify things. So a lot of people with psychiatric disorders, we classify them as having a deficit in consciousness, perhaps. And that's the wrong way to look at it. It just means that based on the arbitrary societal standards that we've set for a specific type of cognition, they aren't meeting what the mean comparison is for a larger population of people. It's just a deviation that makes them slightly different, but it's not a detriment unless you assign it the value of detrimental. So I can understand why you might say that, because that's kind of the perceptual view that people have on these things, but I don't see that as a level of consciousness. I see that as a value judgment based on how we form societies. So that's why they fell apart. But yeah, but they all come from an emergent. Without our cortices, I don't think that we're able to be aware. Like if you remove my prefrontal cortex, I no longer exist. That's just fact. If you lobotomize me, who I was pretty much isn't there anymore, even though I can respond to stimuli. Once you start messing with my brain, fundamentally who I am immediately changes. And if it's gone, I'm not here. So if I disappear when my brain is gone, am I really here before it's there?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's two separate questions then. So one is about a symmetry related to personal identity.
Yeah.
And the other one goes back to what consciousness is. I would like to revisit the previous one, because I didn't quite get just a few descriptive terms to be helpful for me to know what you mean by the word consciousness. And I was just surprised when you said that you don't see that in levels among human beings.
No,
I agree with you that the value term, like whether something is detrimental or harmful, these are normative judgments we make.
Yeah.
But empirically, it seems quite obvious that there are certain cognitive abilities that some humans can engage in and others can't.
Yes.
That infants cannot recognize themselves in a mirror, or toddlers cannot grasp abstract concepts in the same way.
Do you see them as less conscious because of that?
Well, I would say they have less rational abilities. I would think infants do not have a similar consciousness to us, which would be a perception of I, a subject, over time. I don't think a newborn infant has that. Let me ask you another question. Can you give me an example of an animal that is aware of its surroundings, that it would not be murder to kill that animal? So if I killed this animal, it is not equivalent to killing a person.
Fly.
Okay, so a fly has a rudimentary understanding of the world around it. I don't know if flies can feel pain, though. I don't know if they have a sophisticated.
I don't know. I'd have to look at that. I don't know if they have sophisticated nervous system. Some
if a
fish
fly,
might.
Okay.
Or lobster.
Okay.
Lobsters have nervous systems.
Do you think the killing of a lobster is the moral equivalent of killing a human?
Do I think that? No. And I think that that's because I'm making a value judgment because I personally, because I am human, place a higher degree of value on humanity than I do to literally any other species.
That is a very interesting argument. What would you say to someone who said, I don't think the killing of a black person is as harmful as the killing of a white person because I place more value on white people because I am white?
I would say you're a horrible racist because I'm at the unless the argument is that you're saying that seeing a lobster as
I don't hold that view. It's a hypothetical.
Certainly. I would hope not. I would certainly hope not. I'm glad you clarified that. But I see what you might be doing here is showing that there's like somebody could make an argument saying that I don't value X group, whatever the group may be. That could be an interspecies group or an extra species group. Somebody could say, I value this group less than that group.
Yeah.
And how do you differentiate why that one value judgment is better than the other? Now, I respect what you're doing. I don't know if respect's the right word because I don't like that analogy, but I see what you're doing. And I would say, based on my, let me, one moment, sure. Just let me finish. Sure. And then absolutely, sorry, because I want to get this out. But what I would say is that how I would respond to that person is how do you differentiate the value of somebody who's another race within your species from yourself? And they wouldn't really be able to have a good answer to that question because there is no good answer to that question because whatever you see as intrinsically valuable as humanity, you would be able to apply to another person who's a member of humanity. Now, once we go all the way down to the level of lobster, it becomes far, far easier to differentiate, which is clearly why I chose lobster or fly. Once you get up as high as other primates, it becomes significantly more difficult to differentiate those things because we have linguistic abilities and can communicate thoughts and are aware of each other's feelings. Those are what makes it more difficult, I think. So, and all of it ties back to cognition. Like even in both of these examples, this prefrontal cortex is like there could be good arguments made for why you shouldn't even kill lobsters. That's why vegans exist, right? But all of these are existing animals that are in the world, that are in the environment, that already exist, that were born and have reached the full instantiation of what they are in the world.
Well, I don't see how the location of an organism determines its value. If it turned out that a fetus did have consciousness, and I think that even under the standards you're operating with, we could say that third trimester fetuses or do you think that a newborn infant has consciousness and thus it would be a person that would be wrong to kill?
I would even argue third trimester abortions I wouldn't be for at all.
Right. Okay. And so, but these arguments from personhood, the problems that I have with them is I think that if they tie it to consciousness as a property, then you lead to one of two conclusions I don't think most people are willing to accept, and I think that would show a flaw in the thinking.
Oh, please.
One would be the idea that personhood is tied to a rational ability beyond most animals. That sounded like what you were arguing earlier when you picked primates, dolphins, that these are just a few select species and the vast majority of non-human animal species wouldn't be persons. It's people with superior linguistic abilities, cognition, possibly empathy. But the problem with that bar is it sets it so high, I don't think a newborn infant could pass. And under that view, no newborn infant would be a person. But the other view that is just that most people wouldn't accept either, that I think is counterintuitive, is that if the bar is set low enough to include newborn infants as persons because they have a particular level of consciousness, then you would have to say that any other animal that has consciousness that is similar to a newborn infant or higher, that the killing of those animals would be the moral equivalent of killing a newborn infant. I think a lobster's awareness of the world might be on par with an infant's. I think a cat or a dog or a pig or a pigeon or a rat, they have equal, if not more, awareness of the world than a newborn. Yet most people would say that it's more severe to kill a newborn infant than to kill those other animals. So I don't think the possession of consciousness or things like that, it doesn't make the explanation there, because it doesn't show why we would value the newborn infant more than many of these other lower order animals like a pigeon or a rat.
Because the newborn infant's one of us. I think that's a pretty clear differentiation. And I think that there are a lot of people in moral philosophy who would make the argument that, any other living things like that take a pacifist approach to harm,
Peter
right?
Singer.
Yeah, and they make, exactly. And they make relatively compelling arguments that are fairly sound. I mean, I still like bacon, so I'll eat bacon. Like, you know what I mean? But
isn't that interesting to? Well, yeah,
it is. It's absolutely fascinating to me. Like, because we do already draw those lines. We draw them extra species, but when we're pressed on it, like you and I are pressing each other right now, it's very difficult to say, what is that line? But when we look at something like a pregnancy, that has the potential, the abstract and objective potential to be a human like us, to be one of our children, to be one of our grandchildren.
To be a person.
To be a person like us, the way that we identify personhood for ourselves.
Just like a newborn has the potential to talk and do things like you or I can.
Right, exactly. But like that draws me back again. And there's another thing I wanted to get on too. And this is fascinating, but that draws me back to the cortical development. Like that's where I really feel like once you have the ability to be aware of your own existence, and you really can't say that a baby isn't aware of their own existence, because one of the bars that we use when we're doing psychometric testings is the ability to self-report, and babies can't self-report. But when we look at their brain activity, we can see that they're having specific types of stimuli and emotional responses to things in similar fashions that adults do, like based on their environment, so that we know that they have that internal life that we identify as human, as us. Like we can recognize that taking place, like those emotional responses. We can see those in those cortices, but it all goes back to the cortices. Like before that brain exists, there's not even the capacity for that. Like if you halt,
what I would say here is, so you've picked a particular biological organ as being the source of our value, because it is able to produce mental states that you consider to be valuable.
I consider them to be us.
Well, I have a question.
Sure.
You consider them to be us. If you were in an accident and you suffered a brain injury that reduced you to the cognitive level of a newborn infant, would you still exist?
Would I, as I exist now, still exist? The version of Shannon that is me? No.
Not the version, the person. You as a person.
Would something like me still exist in this physical instantiation?
Would you something
resembling me?
Yeah, but if you were cognitively reduced to the level of a newborn infant, would we still consider you to be a person? Yeah. You have a very different personality, but I wonder, would you still be a person?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Well, that's good, because some people would say, like, oh, if all my memories and everything were gone, I would be gone.
I would be gone, but that doesn't make me any less a person just because I'm no longer me. Like, you're still a person and you're not me.
That's deep. Right, but I think the way we could look at it is, our personalities grow and develop over time, and they change, but the underlying person is still, our personhood is something that's much more a stable foundation for our personality to be attached to. But I need to go back to see your argument that it's us, these particular kinds of a being that has conscious mental states is a person.
Or could be a person, depending on where you draw that line. And the trick is figuring out where's that line that you switch from just cognitively aware of your surroundings, maybe responding to environmental stimuli, to self-awareness, capacity for thought. And why do we assign more value to one group than another? If we're going to do that, we need to figure out what attributes one group of value and not another group. And I don't have a good answer.
Well, I'm willing to switch gears here to offer an argument that maybe if we're stuck on value, because
probably,
well, the next route that I would go is because to me, everything you're arguing for as to why a newborn infant would be a person, and it would be, we could call it murder to kill a newborn infant.
Yeah, we sure would.
A rat that can navigate a maze surely has the same level of consciousness or cognition as a newborn infant. I mean, it can navigate a maze, but most people would not say a rat is a person.
But why is that the valuable metric for assigning personhood? Like, so I've referenced earlier, and I didn't get a chance to expand upon it as much as I probably should have. I didn't articulate it very well. Is when you put a newborn in an MRI machine, like the emotional centers of the brain start to activate.
Do rats have emotional centers of their? Do they have similar elements in their brain? Like they have stress features when they get stressed? They
have stress features, but there could be an argument made that that's more of a stimuli response sort of reaction. Like all organisms, even plants, have stimuli response, right? They're centered in different areas. Once you become mobile, you essentially need kind of a mobile command unit. And that's kind of what a brain ends up being. And reptilian structures are more like our subcortical areas, like where our limbic system is located. That's why we call the cerebellum our reptilian brain. And then there's kind of midbrain structures built on top of it, and each has sort of a specific function. A lot of them are sort of like reflective and movement and just operating our junk, right? So rats mostly have the reflexive and movement and operating junk with some sort of problem solving areas in order to navigate their environment. They could have emotional centers. I would have to look deeper at rat brains, so I don't have the good answer to that. Maybe they do. But
here's the thing. So I'm trying to figure out in order to determine personhood, I'm trying to figure out what is the property that makes someone a person. That is, it's a necessary and sufficient condition that if you have this property, you're a person. And if it is consciousness, then to me, if a non-human animal has that property, we should treat them as persons. And since we do not in things like pigeons, rats, even we go up another level to dogs or cats. I think dogs and cats seem to have emotional lives, but most people find it most people are understanding of euthanizing unwanted dogs, but most people aren't going to euthanize unwanted newborns. So I still believe, once again,
unwanted dogs.
Oh, right, gosh. Dogs that no one will adopt.
I don't like euthanizing unwanted. That's awful.
Right, but do you think your local? Which would you find more distressing in your city? That it euthanized 1,000 dogs or euthanized 1,000 newborns last year?
Well, obviously 1,000 newborns, because I assign higher value to newborns because they're humans like me, and I assign higher values to things that are like me. If there was a bunch of if you asked a bunch of dogs the same question and we're giving them the same emotional life, they would have a different answer. They would say the dogs.
Sure, but don't fetuses and embryos, they're also biological humans as well. So aren't they part of that which we should value?
No, because I think like once a newborn is born, no, I'm not saying that you shouldn't have. I have an 8-year-old, right? So I have a baby, and I've had a miscarriage. I've never had an abortion, but I've been pregnant twice.
I'm sorry to hear that.
I wasn't meant to elicit that. I'm just letting you know that, like, I've been through pregnancies and want pregnancies, right? Like, and if I got pregnant now, it would be very hard for you to convince me to have an abortion. I wouldn't want it because I'd want the kid, right? But there are circumstances where I wouldn't want to make that choice for somebody else. I'm going to quickly answer this question, and then we're at 45 minutes in, so I want to move on to the second thing. I know
it moves so fast.
I know. This is really.
Then we're gonna go to Q&A, or
well, I do want to cover one other thing, and then we'll take questions. Yes, but okay, that's I'll move on to the other thing, even though I don't feel like I fully answered your question. But
We'll figure it out. I went fast.
I did go fast, right? This is a fascinating topic. Like, there's a lot of moral philosophy, I think, that goes into this too, and like how we assess value to living things in general. But the second part that I wanted to talk about, and I was hoping that we would get to, is the idea of autonomy. Because we've been talking a lot about the baby and not very much about the person who carries the child. Now, one of the other perspectives that I have, and I'm interested to hear your opinion on this, is that it's nobody else's right, whether they are a potential human or a currently existing human, to utilize my bodily resources to sustain themselves. Like if somebody else, I'm sure you've heard the violinist analogy. Like if somebody else, if you required a consistent blood transfusion from me for even 3 months, and I had to walk around with you transfusing my blood for 3 months, I don't have a moral obligation to provide that for you. However, I do have a moral obligation, even if you are my child who I did give birth to, I don't have that moral obligation. Like that moral obligation ends at birth for mothers. Like if my son needed a blood transfusion, I would give it to him tomorrow.
You're not obligated to do that.
But I'm not obligated to do that. We no longer hold people to that obligation once that baby is outside of the mother. However, we hold the mother to that obligation when the baby is inside the mother in whatever phase of development that fetus is in. So what's your position on that?
I believe that people do not have the right to obtain bodily tissue or organs from others in some kind of extraordinary way, like the donation. If I were to donate tissue or blood to another person, that would be extraordinary and it would be heroic because I'm not obligated to do that. However, I do believe that if someone is a person, they have a right to life. Now, normally for persons like you or me, our right to life is more of a negative right. It's a sense of we have a right to not have other people kill us. Don't shoot me, don't stab me, don't poison me. Like if people, I have a right to life, and so if people leave me alone, they will basically respect my right to life. But the problem is, as human beings get younger and younger, that's not necessarily true. Like for a newborn infant, if you leave a newborn infant alone, you actually would violate his right to life. He would die from exposure. So the newborn infant's right to life also includes the right to have other human beings, the right to care from other human beings. And I guess we'd ask, well, what human beings does that newborn have a right to? And logically, it would make sense the human beings who brought that newborn into existence. Sure. The mother and father are the ones who have the corresponding duty to the newborn to care for that child, whether they want to or not, whether they intended to. So just as a man, if he causes a woman to become pregnant, even if he didn't want to have a baby, I would say he is obliged to provide child support because he is the father of that child and he owes that child care, whether or not he wants to continue having that obligation. And I would say that mothers have obligations to provide for their children before and after birth, not extraordinary ones. But
why are they different though? Why does the father only have an obligation to money, but the mother has an obligation to continue to take care of the child? That's interesting to me because I feel like that should be equal, right?
Right. Well, what I would say is if, let's say you had a starving child, you have a mother and father and you have their newborn baby and the newborn baby is crying and they don't have any food. Let's say lactation was the only way to keep that newborn baby alive. If the father could lactate, I would say he has an obligation to sustain the life of that infant. I've heard it's possible, maybe. All I know would be from Meet the Parents. I think Robert De Niro said any mammal can lactate. That scene with Ben Stiller. But odds are in that situation, it would only be the mother who would be able to provide.
There's more to childcare than feeding, though.
Right. There's more to it, but
it's very rare that that's the only option.
Right, but what I'm trying to make an analogy is that when the mother and father are in a position where they're the only ones who can keep the child alive through the natural use of their bodies, they're obliged to do that because this is their child who has a natural claim upon them. And the same would be true for the child before he or she is born. If we say the fetus is a person and it has a right to life, then I would say, what does that mean for the fetus to have a right to life? if it does not have the right to the one thing that can keep him or her alive. So I'd say the right to these bodily autonomy arguments, the violinist, the one you're proposing, I think is the more sophisticated one, but I ultimately think it's disanalogous. But in autonomy in general, I'm very wary about these kinds of appeals, and they disturb me a bit.
Interesting. Why is that?
Well, because they've been used in the past to justify the powerful oppressing the powerless. In the 19th century, there was a court case in North Carolina versus Jesse Black. Mm-hmm. And the question was, does Mr. Black have the right to beat his wife? And what the court said was, well, that's not what the court said. I mean, it's not what the court says now, but in the 19th century, what they said was, as long as he doesn't leave a mark. And they said the reason was because it's his home, and the state which should not intrude upon the domestic curtain, and he as the husband and father has the right over his home to exercise it as he sees fit. But we now see that as barbaric to say that just because he has power over his wife and his children doesn't give him the right to harm them. They're still persons. And I would make a similar analogy to an unborn child who is within the womb. Just because the mother has great power over this child and has a great blessing to allow this child to grow and nourish this child, does not give her the right to treat this child however she may deem appropriate.
But so however deem appropriate, though, is essentially like if you want to go back to the analogy of the court case, mm-hmm. If he removed her from the home, you know what I mean? Like you're essentially saying, I need to process this through because I want to make sure that I'm getting you. There was a lot there. So you see that once a child is born, they still essentially kind of have a right to the body of the woman because of lactation, even though there are other alternatives to keep the child alive.
They have a right to care. I'm not saying an exclusive right to lactation. I'm saying a child has a right to nutrition, shelter, the things a child needs to grow and properly develop, and parents are obliged to provide that. And there's a different multitude of ways they can provide it after birth, but there's really only one way they can provide it before birth.
Okay, so before birth, the child, because the argument's about utilization of the woman's body, which can be detrimental. Like there are instances, and I want to get this out, and it doesn't always pertain to this argument. Like, and this isn't every instance. I want to get it out, and then I'm going to get to my other point. But there are instances where a pregnancy is or could be life-threatening. Like, for example, I wouldn't have an abortion. Again, I'm going to go back to myself. But I have multiple sclerosis. I had to be induced in my last pregnancy, and it's the reason I had a miscarriage with my first one. It was because I have MS, and my body didn't deal well with it. Like, I have generalized autoimmune disorders, too, so my body kind of attacks pregnancies and attacks itself. I was borderline to the point that I may have lost the use of my legs and may have had, like, if I get pregnant again, it could be dangerous for me. Like, it could be dangerous. Sure. I would still see it through personally, but I don't feel like I have the right to make that choice for another person, especially if it's a pregnancy where I was raped or it was incest, or like there's a confluence of circumstances where a woman's body could be seriously damaged, permanently damaged. It could result in death, or it could result with them being incapacitated to the point that they can't even take care of the child anyway. I wouldn't have been able to take care of my son had I been paralyzed. Luckily, I wasn't. But if I get pregnant again, that's a potentiality that could happen. I have to weigh that, right? Sure. So does a child have a right to my body if it's going to cause that sort of detriment before they even are the equivalent of what I would constitute a person based on their cortical structures? Because like a zygote and a blastocyst are very, very small bundles of cells. And like once we get to like the embryonic stage, even before they're a fetus, like they could be doing a serious amount of damage to me. Do you have the right to do that sort of damage to me if it's going to be the only way to keep you alive? No, you don't. But people make the argument when it's a pregnancy that, like you put yourself in this situation, you have an obligation to see this through no matter what it does to you, emotionally, mentally, physiologically, life choice wise. And I mean, you even reference the dude has to pay and the woman has to lactate. Like, there's a disproportionate obligation societally and from a physiological perspective, even after birth, that falls upon a woman. So that's a choice that you'll never have to make yourself. Thank goodness. I hope, and I hope I never do either. But is it fair for either you or I to say that we should be able to make it for someone else? Like, is that early stage pregnancy so much more important than a fully instantiated woman like me? Like, how do you weigh off those values?
Okay. Well, let me address the different points that you've brought up. First, I would say that even if a moral issue is not going to directly affect us, we have the duty to form moral opinions and even to pass laws that could affect the choices of other people. I mean, you or I may never, for example, suppose I wasn't married and I didn't have children. Let's say I may never, even if I were single and I didn't have children of my own, I would still have a moral duty to promote laws that prevent child abuse, for example.
I agree that.
Even if it doesn't affect me, I can still, or let's say climate change. You could say we have a moral duty to prevent catastrophic climate change, even if it doesn't happen for another 100 years. Even if it doesn't affect us now, it could affect persons that don't even exist yet.
But these are all things that could potentially have an effect on you.
Well, not, I mean, but let's say even like if people abuse children and I'm an adult and I don't have children, it won't affect me. But I can see that it's wrong and I ought to do something. And I think abortion falls under that. Some of the other points that you brought up, so these hard cases, and they are very hard, traumatic cases about rape, or if someone's life is in danger, or they have a health problem in a pregnancy.
And they're worth considering when you're talking about laws, which is the reason I brought it up, because you referenced that it should be illegal.
Sure. What I would say here is that we have to answer the prior question, is the unborn child a person? If the unborn child is not a person, it doesn't matter what reason you give for abortion.
And we couldn't answer that question.
Well, I didn't expect that you or I would be able to answer it in 45 minutes.
Well, then how can we make laws around it? Like, you're advocating that there should be a law made because we're constituting it as a person, but you and I could decide, and no one can decide whether or not it is.
But that's like saying 150 years ago, people couldn't decide if slaves were persons or not. Then,
no, it's not like that at all.
What?
I don't think it's like that at all.
But wasn't there a debate about the morality of slavery 150 years ago?
Yeah, just because people debated whether or not somebody had value in the past doesn't mean that us having a conversation, like, I can see how you can make the analogy, but us having a conversation about a bundle of cells that don't have a brain, to me, isn't the same, that are completely reliant on, like, I don't want to say parasitic, but like at the very least borderline parasitic relationship, or at least symbiotic sort of relationship inside another human's body. But I don't see that as analogous to a fully instantiated human who we assigned differentiating value to because we were ignorant at that point in time.
But I would just say we're ignorant now. About when it comes to the value of the unborn, that a human embryo is not a potential person. It is a person with great potential. To give you an analogy that sometimes people have a hard time seeing it, if you and I went to Loch Ness and I took out my Fujifilm Polaroid camera and took a Polaroid picture of the Loch Ness monster rearing its head, I'd be like, awesome, I've got the photo, I'm gonna get the $1 million. And you looked at the Polaroid, the second it came out of the camera, it would only look like a brown smudge. And if you threw it in the lake, I'd be like, what did you do? You'd say, well, that's not a picture of the Loch Ness monster. It's just a brown smudge.
And it never will be if I throw it in the lake.
But that's because you didn't allow it to develop. What that picture was fully present there.
But it was never a picture.
Well, if it came out of the camera and you ripped it up, you ripped up an actual picture of the monster, right?
Once it's fully developed, it's a picture. Before it's fully developed, it's just a potential picture. I just ruined your hope that you might have a picture is what I ruined. So
you're saying I couldn't have a reasonable hope that Polaroid I'm holding in my hand was a picture picture of that monster.
You can have a reasonable hope that it will be a picture, but until it is a picture, it's not a picture. All I did was ruin your hope that it was that you were gonna have the picture that you expected to have, because you orchestrated the circumstances to produce a picture, but a picture was never produced because I interceded before the picture was able to happen.
That's kind of like, yeah, I just don't think most people would agree with that analogy. That's the closest I can find to the idea of something is present, even if we don't recognize it. It just needs to continue to develop, but it's still that I would say that Polaroid, that picture, that piece of paper that came out of the camera was qualitatively different than all of the other pieces of paper in it, even though they may look the same. But
sure.
to go
just
back,
like a blastocyst is different than an egg and a sperm if they're sitting next to each other.
Absolutely, one is an organism and the others aren't. But to go back to the hard cases and things like that, I would agree with you. If the unborn is not a person, who cares? You could give abortion for any reason.
Yeah.
I would say then, if the fetus is a person, then when these hard cases arise, we should just try to do our best moral reasoning to see how we would apply it to cases involving born people. Like if a mother and child were in a car accident, and there may be a way where we can only save the mother, and unfortunately we can't save the child, then we just save the mother. But we might say, well, is it okay to saw through the child to get to the mother and save her? I think most people would say, well, even if the child's going to die anyways. I think many rescue workers would say, no, I'm not going to kill this child in the wreckage to get to the other victim. I can't.
But what if you use the same analogy with just two people? Like, I think when people put child in that scenario, they do it because child elicits a very visceral emotional response, because we all have this visceral to protect child.
Sure.
Like when you put person next to person.
Sure, you and I sitting in a boat that's sinking, I would not be justified in pushing you out of the boat and causing you to drown in order to save my own life.
You don't think so? So you don't think that there's ever any instance where self-preservation takes priority? You should always sacrifice yourself.
I believe the Greek philosopher Socrates once said, it is better to suffer evil than to inflict it upon others.
That's very noble philosophy.
And Jesus said some other important things too. But
who's that guy?
We'll start with someone that I think a lot of people. Well, Jesus said that no greater love than he who lays down his life for his friends, or even then for a stranger, really. So for me to model after. But my point being that with that, if persons are valuable, then we understand that we ought not kill people, even if it may yield positive benefits for us. If we start down the path of saying it's okay to kill people because of this positive outcome, to directly kill them, to intend their death and directly kill them, to have a positive outcome, that leads to scary results to me. I think should really concern people. I think rather we ought to cherish all human lives, and we should protect all human lives and consider all human beings as having equal value regardless of different traits about them, regardless of different biological traits, be it race, age, physical development, mental development, and then all people are equal because we just pick one thing, which is being a member of the human community that matters. And so I think that an unborn child, I think an abortion provider has the same intrinsic dignity and worth as an unborn child. So like I reject abortion related violence of all kinds, but that'd be essentially the position that I would put forward, and I think it's a sensible one for people who care about equality and goodwill towards others.
I see your perspective, and I thank you for having the conversation. I'm gonna start taking questions in a minute. I have maybe one more thing to say, because you know me, chitty chat. I did see one super chat come through. Any super chats will be read first. If you have questions for either Trent or myself or both of us, or you want to tell us you're awesome, anything that's mean will not be read. Thanks for the donation. Don't say mean things.
Well, that's
so no, I don't. My audience is an absolute delight, and I love them. And it's not a thing that's ever happened. Actually, I always feel the obligation to say it, but it's just really not happened. They're always wonderful. But I'm also going to have a look after I'm done this in the side chat, which I do have open now, so that I can see if anybody wants to @ me at Shannon Q. Make sure that I see it. But I am going to prioritize the people that were kind enough to donate. So the last thing I want to say is, one, thank you. I appreciate this. I hope you feel that you were respected and heard.
Yes.
So I appreciate you coming. It's a contentious issue that a lot of people can just kind of want to fight about, because especially it's very emotionally charged as well and imbued. So I appreciate you having a positive dialogue with me in regards to our positions. Too. It's valuable to me, and I think it's valuable to other people as well. And I really do. I feel like the crux of our disagreement, like even ignoring all of the other nuance, because there's a ton of nuance in a discussion like this. You could talk about it for days. Like we've already talked for just a little over an hour. So thank you for your patience as well. It flew by. Is where we assign personhood. Like I just feel like for me, it's higher up on the scale of development than it is for you. Like for you, it just seems like it's like moment of conception. And for me, it's moment of fully functional cortical development, which there's some debate about where that happens, but that's kind of where it happens for me, which is where it becomes morally difficult and ambiguous for me. And prior to that, I don't have as much moral difficulty. And I think it's just really, it boils down to where you and I ascribe personhood and having different ideas of where that happens.
Yeah, and the last thing I would say is you brought us something earlier about like, well, if I stop being a person when my mind goes away, isn't my mind when I become a person? And I think ultimately my position would be, we are people who have minds, but we're not identical to our minds, especially given that with cortical development, the brain, trillions of new synaptic connections happen in the 9 months after birth to develop self-awareness. I would say that my position would be that a person comes into existence when they as an organism come into existence. Mm-hmm. And then when they die, the reason they go out of existence is not necessarily because their mind is gone. Even if you were reduced to the state of an infant through a brain injury, you're still a person. The person is lost when the organism is lost and you become a decomposing corpse. So my symmetry is personhood begins when the organism begins after a successful conception, and personhood is lost after the organism loses organic unity and death occurs and decomposition occurs.
Okay. I think we may differ a little bit there, but if I start to get into it, we'll be at it for another hour. So there is actually only the one super chat. It's from First Contender, and they're Team U. They said Trent did well.
So that's nice. Well, I think we both did well. A good
I appreciate your perspective, and that's what's most important, I think.
Sure.
Everybody's air quotes team is going to root for them. So what's important is to be able to have nuanced dialogue that people can pull something from.
Sure.
So Brent Kalar says, does a fetus have to be a person, or is it enough that it have a future of value?
I wanted to bring this up in our conversation.
Go ahead. There's your opportunity.
This is very helpful. There is another argument one could put forward. It's a more limited one, but there is an agnostic philosopher named Don Marquis at the University of Kansas. And this is his argument. He says abortion is wrong because it's wrong to kill a being that has a future like ours. And his argument is that the reason it's wrong to kill newborns and adults is because they have a future like ours. But it's not wrong to kill dogs or cats or rats or lobsters, because even if they have similar cognitive abilities, they don't have a future like ours where they would ever have these rational functions like you or me. And so Marquis's position would entail the wrongness of not just killing newborns or adults, but also most human fetuses and embryos, except for maybe those that have anencephalus and will not develop past the fetal stage. But otherwise, it would entail the wrongness of killing fetuses or embryos. And listeners who want to learn more about that argument, he's not even religious, he's an agnostic. They can look up Don Marquis, Marquis, and it's called the Future Like Ours argument.
That would be interesting to look at. See, I'm not sure how you assign, like that would go right back to like how you assign value and differentiate personhood to me, and we could just rehash all that, but let's not.
Well, Marquis is very clear. It's not about personhood. It's about figuring out what beings.
But you're attributing more value to a human contribution to existence, or you're attributing more value to just being a human and existing because why? Right? Like that's what it comes to.
It's a future like ours. It's having experiences like you or I have.
Okay, so it doesn't necessarily have to be human. It just has to be, congruent with the human type of existence, with the type of experiences that we have as we go
He
through our
sees
life.
the wrongness of killing is that it's deprivation. It deprives someone of something valuable, and that's that future that doesn't deprive it of animals, for example. Most nearly all animals wouldn't have that property. But humans do, and Marquis is open to other animals maybe having it, but he doesn't line it with personhood. He lines it with that future-oriented value.
So it's an argument of deprivation of human possibility,
of possibility of a rational future, because then it would also explain why it's wrong to kill Superman or wrong to kill a non-human alien.
But then, like, is it wrong to kill Hitler? Like, you know what I mean, though. Like, how do you attribute a positive value,
right? And what do you
existence?
Sure, and
like,
what you would
have
say,
to have like a very sort of idealistic version of like all of us are gonna do good stuff.
He wouldn't say it's absolute. He'd say all things being equal. If someone's innocent and will have a future like ours, but one could be justified in killing someone like in self-defense or in war. But then again, it's like, what about baby Hitler? There's a Pandora's
What would you
box.
do, right? Yeah, exactly. That's an interesting question. I'll have to look into that argument more because it's not something that I've delved into with nuance, and the idea of potentiation. Like, do we automatically assign value to potential? Interesting. Oh, I have another super chat. Thanks. Oh, Joseph Kirby. Hi, Joseph Kirby. We need more abortion convos like this. I loved it. That's a sentence I never thought I would get to read in my life. We need more abortion. Well, that's good though. That's positive. It's great. But it's also sad because it means that most people can't have,
Jesus said something similar to this. He looked upon the crowds and he said they were helpless and hopeless, like sheep without a shepherd. He said, the harvest is plenty, but the laborers are few. Pray that the master will send laborers out. So the harvest for having good conversations out there, it's plentiful, but the laborers who can engage in them are few. We do need more.
I couldn't agree with that more, which is why I think more people should foster these types of dialogues and certainly not deter them. So thank you. Brent's on fire over there in the chat. It's like, is he a plant? You got branches? Shannon Q. If we ask...
That's just me, and I changed my
name.
Let's see, what's a fake name I can come up with? How about Brent?
Clever. All right. Oh, I lost him for a second. All right. So if we ask why is it wrong to kill Shannon Q, the answer would be her future has value. Or wouldn't it be that I assign myself current value? Like, I feel like that's... Yes. But I also think that I assign myself current value. And other people assign themselves current value. And then we can recognize that since we assign ourselves current value, we wouldn't want to harm somebody else because we wouldn't want them to take that, what we value away from us, right? Like,
it's a little bit like a golden rule argument.
Yeah, do unto others.
I wouldn't want someone to abort me. So, but I think the argument there where I would take that is the problem is there appear to be many human beings that we agree is wrong to kill that are incapable of assigning their own value or saying, I am valuable, I want to live, to utter that proposition.
Right.
And that would include newborn infants as well as people with very severe mental handicaps. And people who are comatose, someone in a reversible coma, so we don't go down the assisted euthanasia rabbit hole.
Oh my gosh, we could do this for hours. All right, so I don't know if I see any other questions in the chat right now, and I've already held you for over an hour and 15 minutes. So
I'm at the office, and they closed an hour and 15 minutes ago. So we'll see if I got locked in.
Oh no! Will you let me know?
I'll be. I told them I would be here late, so I think I'll be okay.
Oh gosh, well, I hope you can escape. It's valuable to me that you escaped the office.
Sure.
I wouldn't want to be trapped in an office. All right, well, but just in case anybody tuned in late, just please let them know who you are and where they can find you.
Sure. So I'm Trent Horne. I'm an apologist and speaker. You can find my books on Amazon. My podcast is trenthornepodcast.com. You can find it's the Council of Trent, COUNSEL, Council of Trent. Shows up on iTunes or Google Play. It mostly caters towards helping Catholics talk to non-Catholics. But every Friday I do Free for All Friday, and that's something even atheists might like. I just talk about whatever I find interesting. So I've talked before about how to hack Disneyland and not wait in the lines, what to do if you get arrested, the cheesiest movie lines in history. So even if you're not religious, you could always try a Friday episode. There might be something there in the podcast you find interesting.
Thank you for being here with me. And I am Shannon Q, and I am an evil atheist infidel. And I appreciate you talking to me. And as always, everybody, help elevate the discourse.